All right. I'd like to call the meeting to order tonight. It's November 27th. It's a regular council meeting, and we'll start tonight with a moment of reflection before we get into the approval of the agendas. So we'll start with a moment of reflection now. All right, thank you. Approval of the agendas. We have two, a consent agenda. Is anyone wishing to pull anything from the consent agenda? Otherwise, a motion to approve as presented. Councillor Wolstenholme, as presented. Called to question, all in favor? Any opposed? Motion carried. A regular meeting agenda. I've heard of no additional items to add. If council has no questions, a motion to approve the regular meeting agenda. Councillor Fox makes that motion. Call to question, all in favor? Motion is carried. And we'll start with the good. Next is for the good of council. Does anyone have something they would like to share? I know there wasn't a whole lot going on this weekend, so let's hear about it. Councillor Henniger?
I think it's a big obvious one, but our Santa Claus parade, and I think this was a big 40th, and the parade was over an hour long. And I think that's such a big achievement for our small town of Fort Macleod. And just speaking to another individual in a neighboring town, they said it took them close to 40 minutes to get from one side of town, which would have normally taken 2 minutes on the highway. Took a lot longer on Saturday, but just how it was orchestrated and all the volunteers, it was amazing. So thank you to all the organizers, Chamber of Commerce, and the parade committee. Very, very much appreciated.
Very good. Anyone else? Councillor Monteith?
On behalf of the Rotary Club, I'd just like to thank the town for the use of the gym and the hallway for our Rotary auction. Numbers weren't quite as high as prior years, but we did very well, and we're very thankful for all the businesses in town who donated items to be auctioned for the people that bought them. So once again, thank you very much.
Yeah, anyone else have comments? I know some of the comments and feedback I had on the parade is that this parade competes with the Macy Day parade. I was like, that's pretty crazy. And it's from someone that came from a bigger city. So it's like, it's not a small deal, right? When you go through, you never really realize how many people are there until you go through the parade and you realize how, yeah, it was amazing. So thank you to all the organizers, volunteers, town staff as well, Chamber of Commerce, the business community for all your support. It was an amazing weekend.
Do we know how many people were watching?
No, I gotta think there's gotta be some kind of a AI camera or something we can get to calculate how many people are there, but
You want Big Brother to start counting the people on Main Street?
I don't. It's just more of a curiosity for a town our size. Did we triple or 4 times our population for that 2 hours? Yeah. I did also want to mention the firefighters ball. I was able to attend, and it was great to be out there. And I don't know. The more I've thought about it, it's one night the firefighters get to be off to be able to spend time with family and friends without the tones going and having to run. So I definitely want to provide a shout out to the firefighters for all they do for us, and it was good to be there and celebrate with them. Did you want to add to that, Councillor Fox? Any other comments? All right, seeing none, we'll carry on to our delegation for tonight. We have our RCMP Sergeant, Christian Lafleur, here tonight to be able to present a quarterly report. So look forward to having some discussion, some dialogue, and questions for anyone. So we'll pass the floor over, the mic over to you, and feel free to share some highlights from your report, and then we'll go from there. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. First part of the report is in regards to the body worn cameras. So the first set of trials that went through was not successful. We're currently looking for another supplier, and they're going to be trying that out pretty quickly. We all want them. They solve a lot of issues, but they have to be reliable, which the ones that we tried weren't, unfortunately. The next part of the report is the various meetings and consultation that either myself or the members conducted. Did you want to go through that, or can we skip ahead unless you have questions on some of them?
No, if there's highlights, but otherwise, I think you can skip ahead. We've all had an opportunity to read through it and get an idea. So if there's any questions, feel free to interrupt as well, Council.
No? Okay. Skipping to page 6, which is the identified priorities. The first one being the crime reduction. Part of that is identifying offenders that are on probations or release conditions in the community. We've identified 3, and the reason why we only have 3 is there's not that many people getting released through probations with the conditions in town that we can monitor. As soon as we get one, we put them on the list, him or her, and then we start monitoring them. The warrant roundup goals that I had set up for the year have already been met, and they're going to be surpassed in the coming next quarters. So even though I set the numbers, we always try to go beyond that. The education tip of the month have been surpassed. I've switched from a monthly tip to a weekly. We do a column in the Gazette every week, and part of that is either concerns that we've identified, the type of call that we receive so that we can address something. The main one continues to be online scams and people calling in to make money, leave or people departing their money. Especially with the holidays now, you're starting to see it even on a Fort Macleod page. The sob story, I have no money, I need something. So most of them are all scams, unfortunately. The second one is enhanced road safety. So we're well on our way to surpass what we had set up in our priorities for this year. Part of that is, and again, keeping in mind visibility. I've instructed my members to be out on the road more and be more visible, pull more people over, and that makes us get more items off the street if you want. One of the things that I tried in the last quarter, which proved to be very successful, is once a month I bring in traffic members. For one shift on overtime, I set a goal for them. It costs about $800 per shift in overtime cost of the detachment. They're bringing anywhere from $3,500 to $5,500 worth of tickets. Any tickets written in town, half of that comes back to the town. While it's not why I do it, it's beneficial to the town, but it also curbs a lot of bad behavior. So we've got a lot of impaired off the road because that's all they do. Unless we have a higher priority call that requires assistance, they're only here to do traffic. So we've gotten impaired, we've gotten people that don't have a license or were suspended because of impaired driving and all that. So it proved quite successful, and I mentioned it to the Reeve for Willow Creek and a couple of the council members, and I've got the okay to make this a regular rotation now.
I was just curious on the 104 tickets. So that's above the
above and beyond, and not from what I'm talking. So the 104 ticket is, I made a partnership with the Coaldale Traffic Unit so that they come to town more often. You know, like I've listed their tickets here, the number of tickets, but I don't count that as part of the detachment ticket quota, not quotas, but expectations. So I keep track of what they're issuing, but it's just for information purposes. I only count what my guys are doing. Does that answer your question? Okay. In there, you're seeing a note saying that we don't do a school zone patrol. It was because in the summer there's no school zone, or there's no schools. Now that school year is ramping up, every morning and afternoon when possible, we're doing patrols there. We've done quite a bit of education, and we're slowly starting to enforce more. But so far, people have been very positive, saying that they like seeing us there. Priority number 3, to be clear, accountable, transparent. I'm a big believer in that. Again, the visibility has been increased. It's continuing to be increased because I think it's important that people see us. In the last town hall meeting that we just had last week, people were saying that they're scared to walk around at night around the banks. So we're taking steps to address that. But it's also, we know who most of them are, and they're basically homeless people that have substance abuse issues. So like I said, in the last quarter, we didn't have a town hall meeting. I'm only supposed to do 2 a year. I've held one in the last couple of weeks. I'm going to be doing another one probably sometime in January, February, to try to set up priorities. I'm also accepting calls from the public anytime, and from any of you if you have any suggestions on what you'd like to be addressed next year. Downtown foot patrols, we've exceeded our goals, and we're keeping on doing more. School visits and presentation in the last quarter, because there was no school, we couldn't conduct them. Now, and again, I had manpower issues, which continues to be an issue, unfortunately. We're attending the schools at least, well, monthly for sure, if not weekly. I've personally attended and spoke to each of the school principals to try to build bridges with them, couple of them coming back from an era where they didn't want police in schools as much as possible unless they called us. Now I'm trying to make it a positive that we're going and we're speaking to the kids, we're speaking to the teachers to try to put a face to the uniform and be approachable. So trying to knock that wall or that barrier, if you want. One of the things that we did for the WAD schools, we attended their lockdown drill, and that was successful. We're pretty happy with that. I think I've made some headways with FP Walsh School. For some reason, they thought that if we showed up, we'd be all guns drawn out and we'd be, anyway. So some misconceptions were cleared, and we're going to be invited to the next lockdown drill. Presentations is a little trickier. We're doing some, we've done quite a bit. FP Walsh is a bit of an issue where they're very careful as to what we could present there. So we're trying to find a middle ground there that allows us to go in there and educate the kids on some aspects. Would you like to go over the crime statistics, or?
No, I don't know that we need to unless any council members have any questions or concerns with them. Is there any specific ones you would like to highlight? I didn't see any big switches or trends going in the.
So crime kind of goes up and down depending on who's who's out and about. So we get people, we lock them in, crime goes down, they go back out, unfortunately, crime goes back up. We have a new process now, I've discussed it with a few of the council members. So what we do now is, from the province, is when we do an investigation, the next step is what we call a pre-charge approval. So we may charge somebody, we may put them in conditions, but then we create this package of the investigation and we send it to the Crown's office. From there, they decide if they're proceeding with it or not. It's not a new process. It's been in trials in Alberta for the last year in some detachments. For example, when I was in energy, we had it. What we found is that a lot more cases are getting thrown out, or not thrown out because it never goes to court. They pick and choose what they want to proceed with or not. So, in a lot of cases, doesn't matter what we say, it doesn't go forward. So that's out of the police hands, but unfortunately, the people that we deal with, our victims, seeing it as, well, police aren't arresting anyone, or that's in addition to, well, police don't hold anyone in custody. Again, with the court system being what it is, the emphasis is on releasing them, and that's out of our hands. Be a lot of cases, we want them kept, and we're not winning that argument. So that's up to the court. So that is something that, as I mentioned, that doesn't get resolved at my level. It starts to get resolved at you guys' level, pushing on the government to maybe make some changes to that.
Yeah, in that regard, I did have an informal conversation with our MLA, but I do think it might be good for the town to officially request more information around the pretrial scenario and what that means.
Mhm.
'Cause some of the examples you gave on the open house are troubling when you hear that someone in some office somewhere is deciding whether something's worth bringing carrying forward with charges or not.
Mhm.
That seems like a pretty risky move in my mind, especially if they're not tracking if these are repeat offenders or not. So I think if council would be in favor of that, to address that via letter to our MLA to request information from, I don't know if it's the Solicitor General or the other department, because I think they're trying to split them up, but regarding Minister of Justice or the Solicitor General.
It'd be the Solicitor General, I believe, but I mean, the minister would also be a good place to.
Yeah.
Again,
Councillor Monteith, you know, comment?
Is there politics involved in this, or is it strictly the judicial system above police that are making these decisions?
I couldn't give you an answer. I'm not a politician. Sorry. But it was forced on us. They decided and it's been in talks for years. BC, for example, has had that for years. The Crown prosecutors, as far back as 2012, when I was in organized crime, were talking about it, that they were dying to bring it in. So I think they were pushing for it. It's all in line with them being overwhelmed with the number of cases. I think it's how it started there.
Very good.
So we're starting to see an uptick again in copper wire theft. What's not helping us right now is the government's trying to decide which way to proceed with the acts that they had put for tracking the people that are bringing in the copper wire. Now they've deemed that it's unconstitutional. So we're starting to see a little bit more again of copper wire theft in the surrounding areas. We know a couple of them are doing it. We have special units that are trying to catch them and go from there. In there, it mentions drug trafficking. We have, and I'm just going to leave it at that, we have a couple of investigation ongoing right now to try again to stop the drug trafficker from setting up or keeping their business going in Fort Macleod. And that's as much as I can go into it for now. You're going to see where it says criminal code traffic. In a lot of cases, we switch from a criminal code or a criminal code matter to a provincial one. I was explaining, I think, at the town hall meeting, impaired driving for now, unless there's aggravating factors. For example, you're drunk and your children are in the back seat. We're going to go with provincial fines if you want, seizing your vehicle and all that. And that's proven to be more effective because their license are suspended right there and then. Their vehicle are impounded for up to starting at 30 days and then more. So that's more effective in that sense. We've had a couple of overdose or death due to overdose in town in the last year. One of the persons that was bringing the bad fentanyl got arrested, so that brought it down. But we're still seeing different types of drugs that are causing overdose. One of the issues that I'm working with Alberta Health Services is on a couple of occasions we've lost cases of sex assault, rape, and impaired driving where we had to do a blood demand. We took, for example, the rape victims to the local hospital in town here, and they refused to help us. They were told apparently that AHS directed them not to administer the sex assault kit. So I'm working with the hospital and then the IROPS to try to figure that one out along with other people in different sections. There's a line that, a phone line if you want, that they're supposed to call because unless you're working at a sex assault center, you're not that familiar with the kit, but there's a number that they can call to get direction on how to do it. So I'm trying to get them the education they need to be able to do that. In case of the blood demand, the same thing as well. They refuse to assist us by drawing blood from the drunk driver because he didn't give them permission, which doesn't apply in those cases. So again, education. I mentioned earlier that we still have a problem with manpower. One of my officers transferred. He's going to Ontario. We have a replacement identified for him, but no idea when that person will be here. So we're going to be short for a little while. As well, there's still issues with one of my members that we're taking action to remedy at this point. So, and I think that's all I have unless there's questions.
Councillor Henniger?
Just with bringing in the my words today, Coaldale Detachment for traffic control, it's been a topic that's been brought up by residents to me is our lights going across the highway, and I know that is an Alberta transportation jurisdiction to get another type of light where you could say buzz it at the skate park intersection for kids to buzz across, and I know that is a provincial jurisdiction, and I'm just wondering, with that detachment coming into town and doing the more traffic, would that not be an advocate that we could showcase that we would possibly need something like that for speeding down those one-ways? Again, it's not on an agenda or anything, but I've heard it, and now being a mom and watching those kids whiz by and everyone's on their phone, a light does trigger people to slam on their brakes. So I'm just wondering if that would be a piece that the RCMP could advocate for through having that additional person in town giving tickets out on our highways. Would that ever be something that you could advocate through Alberta Transportation, that we get basically better lights for going across our busy highways?
I think that's not something that the RCMP would have any ways doing.
No, sorry, I should rephrase it, but just the information that you're bringing from them being in town and getting more speeders or getting more impaireds on those one-ways, would that not be those types of statistics? Could we not provide that?
You could.
To showcase it.
I can provide them anytime. The other thing that'd be probably a lot more helpful, because I've noticed on the westbound lane, you have one of those speed indicator. So I know when I was in Claresholm, they have the same thing there. And I forget what I think it's every week, I was getting the statistic. So how many people, when they were speeding, and how many people were actually speeding. So I think for something like that, I don't know if you're getting that through your system, you could use that, and that would have a better impact than me doing that. Because if we're not doing the radar, we don't have the numbers to provide you, but that thing would provide you accurate and factual number.
I was just seeing if that extra piece of them physically being in town, if those could ever be relayed in numbers that would advocate for something like that. And then my only other question for you, Chris, was the SCAN program. And just hearing a little bit, I can't remember who sent it in our council message, but SCAN, and they were awarded an opportunity in Lethbridge, or they've set up in Lethbridge. I'm just wondering if you've seen SCAN or the presence of SCAN within the town of Fort Macleod, or if you're working with them at all right now.
We have a regular meeting with them. I think the next one is tomorrow at lunchtime. I've worked with SCAN before when I was in Calgary. The one thing to keep in mind is that they're supposed to be doing Lethbridge and the surrounding areas, but they're going on a priority type cause, if you want, right? And that's citizen driven. In all, what's going to happen, the same thing that's happening in Calgary, is most of their calls are going to be in Lethbridge. They may have a few in the surrounding towns, i.e. Fort Macleod, but for the most part, they're going to be working out of Lethbridge, and they have, I think, only 5 officers or 7. So we may see them, but we're not going to see them that much, unfortunately.
Thank you for those questions. Is there anything else you wanted to share with us, Chris? No? Any other questions from council? So if there are areas of concern, say by the skateboard park or traffic, those are things that you would appreciate hearing from us that you'll be able to direct even Coaldale to be able to help focus on if they're in the area, correct?
Yes. Yeah. Again, I'm not sure if you guys are getting those numbers from your speed.
Do we know, Lisa or Anthony, if we're tracking those numbers?
We can get them. We haven't since Adrian's been gone, but we can get them, and they are data storing signs.
And you would appreciate that info?
It would work for me because I could direct more guys in the times that it's more prevalent, if you want. But from the town's point of view, it would also, if you're looking at getting a hold of somebody to put, like, for example, the crosswalk, that would give weight to your arguments towards that, same as traffic lights.
So if anyone's using it as a camera for racing, you can just clock the times and then set up a speed trap.
The one thing that Coaldale brings that I can't offer is they have unmarked police vehicle. I've tried to get one for here because obviously when people see us, they're tapping the brakes, they're slowing down, so it defeats the purpose. But the big key word for the RCMP at this point is visibility. So any units that, except for traffic, that has unmarked vehicle will be losing them shortly, is from what I was told.
Okay. All right, any other questions? On behalf of council, thank you for coming again. We appreciate you, the information, the dialogue, and wish your team well. Thank you. All right, under consideration of delegation, do we want to consider sending a letter to our MLA to request more information regarding the pretrials, the reasoning behind pretrials and how that works? Officially, is council interested in that?
I think it's called ministerial request is what they would call it.
Yeah.
So
Is anyone wishing to make a motion to that end for the administration to draft such a letter to our MLA? Councillor Wilson makes that motion. Any other comments on that? If not, theme, we'll call the question. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carried. All right, nothing under unfinished business. Under new business, item 1, for off-site improvements, I will be declaring a pecuniary interest, so I will be stepping away from the chair and passing it on to our deputy chair, or deputy mayor, Councillor Van Hagwas.
Seeing as we don't have a director here to present this, if we can get our CAO to speak to the item.
Thank you, Council. Oh, how I wish we had our director in place already. So before you this evening, we have an offsite improvement submission. As council is well aware, and hopefully the majority of our community, there's quite a large development occurring on the west side of Fort Macleod. 44 acres is to be developed in Structural Trust and Formasteel's new 180 square foot 180,000 square foot manufacturing facility. And so part of the development of this piece of land, a requirement to get the services to that piece was part of the development agreement. And so how that works is we create an agreement, we get into an understanding with the developers and the utilities, so the wastewater and the water services are put into place from where they were existing to all the way to the edge, to the property line of the developed parcel. This piece, in some circumstances, the offsite developments might only benefit the future development. In this case, these developments have actually there's been an inclusion of a future tie-in. Miranda, could you zoom in on the top left corner of that map for me, please? So as you can see on the top left, I guess we'll give you some parameters. The highway, well, it's labeled Highway 3, if council's familiar with the orientation of the map. You see on the top left, just as the dotted line that comes from the right to the left is the utilities that have been placed already. They cut under the first road, then they cut under the future road that will be there for this development. And right there's a stub out. And so that stub out is for future development. Not that anything is currently in the plans for developing that side, so that would be there to cut under the highway to potentially service I think it's around 40 acres and just above the golf course. The town has looked at that with previous councils. Some extensive plans have actually been made, but nothing's ever pulled the trigger. So when determining the parameters of this development agreement, that stub out for future development was included so that, the town is already potentially benefiting from this infrastructure that's going in. Another thing to note, obviously, the majority of the cost for this is covered by Structural Trust Formasteel or Fader Group. I lost exactly what I was going to say. So the majority of the cost is covered by them, and we are tonight requesting or a recommendation that we cover a portion of this cost, as all of this infrastructure does become property of the town. They are responsible for it now and until their completion is done, and there's a warranty period that they will be responsible for this infrastructure to make sure that it was done right. But after that period, then it just becomes town infrastructure to service obviously this development and potential future developments. So the recommendation before you tonight is that council approves $125,000 in cost reimbursement to Franz Fader Construction for a portion of underground water and sewer infrastructure costs for the new 44-acre development and potential future development in the area. And obviously we've identified the location. Obviously we recognize outside of the future potential benefit that we are getting from this infrastructure, supporting the size of the development that Franz Fader Construction is actually taking place in our community. I think that's considerable. The province obviously thought it was a worthy investment, as well as they granted nearly $1 million for the project. And so I think our contributions to the project, even though it's mostly for our infrastructure and potential future infrastructure, but our contributions, though much smaller than the province's, I think help continue to boost the economic growth and the infrastructure for future projects as well. As far as financial implications, we discussed that this would be used from a reserve as we move forward. The one thing to note, once the project is done, obviously they will be taking advantage of our non-residential tax incentive. But after that quickly passes, the property tax on a property of this size and a job this size a project of this magnitude would be considerable. And so the town recognizes that, you know, that 125,000, while it might seem considerable, it is a help, but you know, we will be benefiting from the infrastructure, we'll be benefiting from the economic effect of this establishment. And that's all I got. So gladly, if you have any questions or concerns, I'd gladly try to answer those now.
If we could open up the discussion with some questions. I have a question. So the $357,000, that's the cost for what we're looking at here?
Yes, that was the cost to go from there to this work. Yep.
Okay. And would there have been a developer's agreement involved in this?
Yes, we have a development agreement with Franz Fader Construction for the work that was done here.
And once the town takes ownership of this, that developer's agreement is essentially null and void, pending the outcome of this offsite improvement? Because a developer's agreement, essentially, if somebody develops a road, then, and if there's adjacent properties to it that aren't owned by the developer, if somebody wants to tie in, they have to pay their contribution, even if it's in 5-10 years, correct?
Paying their portion to the municipality? Or like, are you talking about a specific
to the
private
developer,
developing land?
right? If the developer puts in a road to their property and there's undeveloped property alongside this new developed road, which is a road allowance, so the town does take over eventually, or as soon as it's constructed, that this landowner, then they're like, oh, great, somebody built me a road. We've seen this, like, I believe Mark Boot and his son-in-law built a big part of 8th Avenue, and Wesco just tied in. You know, I don't believe there was a development agreement at that time, but if there would have been, I believe that, and I'm using names so that people know what we're talking about, but I believe that Wesco would have had to reimburse the developer being correct. Is that how I read the development agreement? I know the operations director would speak to this, but.
Yeah, my understanding, and I did try to, you know, with when Adrian was here, try to understand fairly well what, you know, the different types of scenarios that can exist with the development agreement, because when this specific scenario was coming up, you know, and realizing when is it best to like, who has ownership for what period of time, and then at what point would the use of the infrastructure that was made, would someone else pay for that? You know, there was actually a conversation about if this was there, you know, potentially we could say, well, we're not going to pay for it unless we tie into it, right? And that's another scenario that he said is possible. Obviously, it sits there on the back burner until something happens. But in this current development agreement, once the infrastructure, now the infrastructure is in place, but once the period, like once their construction is over and the period, the warranty period, like, and I knew this once, I don't remember how much it was, whether it was a year after construction was finished, but there's a period in which that they're still responsible. Once that's done, my understanding is that it is the town's infrastructure, and any future tie-ins or anything like that, there wouldn't be anything owed to the developer in this specific circumstance. But there are scenarios where, like, and I don't recall the language, is like endeavor to assist. Like there was scenarios where something like that might be the case, where if someone else wants to develop and said, well, I paid for that thing, you know, there could be language in the development agreement that if anyone else ties in, they owe the original developer a certain amount of money. But we don't have something like that in this development agreement.
That was along the lines of what I was asking, because we could pay for this and never use it. Whereas if we paid for it when we use it, that's, you know, they have rights to this sewer line. It's on our property. We maintain it, but it's essentially theirs. I guess that's the other side of the coin. So just wanted to, I know that's an option. Councillor Monteith?
I think I know the answer to this one, but I'm presuming we don't have a policy at the present for something like this. And I realize this is an unusual one, but I'm just wondering, as these projects are getting bigger and bigger, that it might be worthwhile to determine the criteria where we would be involved or where we wouldn't be involved.
That's an excellent point, and it is something that administration has considered and discussed. Because exactly, right? Like, well, at what point do we contribute? At what point, like, if we don't ever use this infrastructure, is this just a contribution to the economic development of a large investment in our community? And so I think that it would be wise to have a policy, thresholds. This current one, right, the 125,000, what did it work out to be? It works out to be just under like 0.5% of their total project. Right, and so, along those lines, let's say, okay, when a project exceeds X amount of dollars, we could say the town, and it might, yeah, it's probably worth exploring, right? Because whether or not there's going to be town-owned infrastructure, the potential that someone else could, other parts of the town could benefit as well. I think that's something to be considered. But more than glad to discuss that further.
Well, I think when we talked about this generally, so at some point in time, we talked about if it was going to be beneficial potentially for other developments, then it made sense for the town to be involved. So if there's a possibility that more development could happen because of that line, then that would make sense. But if it's strictly for the benefit of the one, maybe not. So, okay, thank you.
I do remember the sale of this land. It's got to be about 3 years ago now. In the last, I think it was first term that we sold this, and it would have been sold for $400 and some thousand as unserviced land. And the expectation was always that it would be serviced by the developer. So while I appreciate the investment in our community, I think that is a separate aspect to this all. I think that's where our business incentive would be our contribution to some degree. That's the way we've worded this. If there was clearly an interested party sitting on the north side of the highway saying, hey, we're going to tie into this in 2 years, but at this point it's just a $125,000 contribution to their infrastructure, to the infrastructure they needed to put in. And that was always that was an expectation and a requirement before they even purchased the land. They knew that. So I don't recall having discussions with, or that the town had discussions with them on servicing this property. So it's a big ask, and I guess I'm a little reluctant, to say the least.
And if, and I guess we don't know exactly what the assessment of the future property will be. Obviously, their construction costs, and they're estimated to be a $28 million project. And obviously, the non-residential tax incentive will be considerable for the first 3 years. Yeah, that's it. I just wanted to make note of that, I guess.
Any other questions or thoughts on this? If not, I think we're going to need to bring this to a motion. Councillor Poitras?
You bet. Yeah, my thought on this is I do, I view this more as an investment in our future. And I think that if there wasn't that potential tie-in for further expansion north of the highway, then I agree. I don't think I'd be as in favor of it, but I do think that, that gives us that potential to invest, and to do that for 125,000 versus a future investment of 350,000 or more. I think this is still a pretty good deal for the town. Again, it all depends on what happens in the future, but at this point, that's how I view it.
One thing that administration did try to consider and put ourselves in the mindset when we were creating the submission and over the past few months with this item. You know, there's been some discussions with council, kind of preliminary ones. One of the pieces that we tried to consider was if this were, you know, ABC Co., if this were Amazon, right? If this were another company that were, you know, potentially coming to our community, you know, would we be more likely to, you know, whether it was, if it was between us or Claire's Home, right? And I know that Fader, Franz Fader Construction, you know, Structural Trust and Fort Steel, they're longtime Fort McLeod. I think there are a number of factors that make it Fort McLeod an attractive space, but, you know, that's one thing that I, in making the submission, kind of considered, like, how much would we do? Would our non-residential incentive be enough to attract these people, or is this something we would consider if it was an outsider looking for a new location? So just something to consider, you know, how attractive we're trying to be for this scenario.
And that's a fair comment that we need to take into consideration. This is a significant project in this community, but I guess I look back at the last 5 years and I look at how many developers, even though their projects may have been $500,000 to $2 million or $3 million, have we contributed off-site improvement dollars to their projects? That's where we set a precedent of not getting involved, and maybe they've never asked. But again, I guess each project is separate. So that's where I'm at with this one. So, Councillor Henniger.
I echo a lot of the comments that are coming from council and administration, and even Anthony speaking on, you know, if this were an Amazon or the Walmart that was strategically placed on that property. But I do go back and think in the same area of, yes, what did that look like in the past? But we physically might not have been on council at that time when you made that, a group made that decision, and administration was different. And I do believe this term of council, and most specifically with our CAO, when you onboarded, a part of our rationale is attracting that business, attracting community members. We're talking new subdivision. All of these other items do come into play when people are making decisions to either relocate or put roots down in a town like our size that has grown substantially. And I've spoken quite a bit of it to council. We're hearing more and more of, how are you making this happen? And I do think initiatives, regardless of who it is, yes, it's a great, I personally worked for them for a long time and they are a great employer, but by not putting so much red tape and encouraging positive ways for development to actually happen, and looking at what that financially might mean for Chris and her department, and how we can offset that differently for the town fiscal year and things like that. It's encouraging people to move here. And it's not only about relocating, but all the other amenities that come with it, that you can find employment, you can have opportunities, you can develop on land, and not just this Fader development. There's a lot of developments happening in our town in the next few years. And I think if we can encourage more development and collaboration, we are going to see it go faster versus projects get purchased, like the land you've stated, Marco. And for some individuals, they will not be able to develop on that for years to come. So I do think we need to look at things differently. And again, there is a financial implication for sure that we need to consider. But I do think our strategic plan aligns with this, of our goal for development and infrastructure in all areas of town. So that's just my piece to it.
Thank you for those comments. Is anybody prepared to make a motion? Councillor Poitras.
I move that council approves the $125,000 in cost reimbursement to Franz Fader Construction.
Any more discussion on the motion? Call the motion to question. All in favor? Any opposed? None. Motion passed. Let's bring back the chair.
All right, thank you. Carrying on to new business, item 2, entity level risk control, and we'll ask our Director of Finance, Chris Holbeck, to introduce.
Thank you, Mayor Fader. Good evening, Council. It is audit time again here at the town of Fort Macleod. And as part of the audit process and the planning for the audit, we have many questionnaires that the auditors give us. Most of them are financial and administrative in nature. And the CAO and myself review and update those annually and send them back to the auditors to do their planning. This one is a higher level questionnaire and memo that talks about the level of risk in the entity, which is the town of Fort Macleod, and how we safeguard those risks and how we communicate and all of our processes around entity risk. So I update it every year, and then I ask the CAO, Anthony, to check it for accuracy and completeness. And then it comes to council, and the auditors request that council reviews it so that you have an understanding of all the processes in place for risk for the town of Fort Macleod, and that you approve it. And then I send it off to the auditors, and they put it in our audit package, and they continue their planning for the 2023 financial audit. So I don't know, it's all a highlight. You should read it. It's fascinating. Talks about the environment within the town of Fort Macleod, our controls, how we communicate, how we assess risk, how we monitor the risks, and then just some probably pretty detailed things about journal entries that I do and Anthony approves that become part of the financial statements. So we have things down to quite a hard science here. We have processes in place, and we have checks and balances and controls and segregation of duties to try and reduce any kind of control risk in the town of Fort Macleod. So I don't have really anything to say. It hasn't changed a lot from last year. It's probably pretty similar to what you guys approved last year for the last audit. But I will take any questions as you see fit. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone prepared to make a motion on this agenda item? Is that your motion, Councillor Monteith? Did you want to make a motion as well to approve as per the recommendation?
I would make the motion to accept this document.
Okay. And your question?
Well, I'm just curious. It's blue to begin with, and then we get to information communication, and there's blue and there's also red. So is there some implication to that?
When the auditors send me their document, it's usually they've got some highlighting for things that they've checked on and things that I'm changing. So I really didn't look at the colors, Jim, sorry. I took away the markup, which is in Word. If anybody knows Word, Microsoft Word, you can mark up a document and you can strike things out. I took that off, but I didn't take away the highlighting for you guys, so I apologize.
Very good, thank you. Any further questions or discussions on the audit controls? Seeing none, we'll call the motion to question. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion is carried.
Thank you.
Thank you. New and amended policies. Lisa Gillingham, our Director of Community and Protective Services, would like to introduce these to us.
Thank you, Council. Tonight we have a new policy to present to Council, as well as amended policies The first two are HR policies. The first one, which is a new one that I'd like to address, is the milestone recognition and retirement policy. The town has not had an official policy or procedure in place for retirement or a recognition policy for some time. My understanding is there did used to be one, but it had kind of gone by the wayside and hadn't been followed for some years. So we would like to officially put one back into place. We feel it's important to recognize our staff, those that have been here long enough that they're retiring. You know, we've recently had some longevity in our staff and retired, and we would just like to have a formal process in place so that it's clear and what staff expectations can be. The milestone piece is also an important piece to recognize the importance of longevity and loyalty with employees as well. So that's the milestone and recognition for retirement policy. The second one that we would like to amend is the exempt employee work condition policy. This was adopted, this is one of a new policy that was adopted when Sue was still here as CAO. We've made some changes to it that more reflect the current practices that we'd like to have. And then as we're going through the recruitment process with the Director of Operations, we reviewed the out of scope employee contracts, and this was one of the things that we felt needed to be updated and just amended slightly. And then there's the Admin 21 cell phone and business use policy that we've made slight adjustments to, and that's more for the administration of the policy itself and just to make it a little bit more clear and concise. Chris actually monitors and runs the cell phone and use policy, but it was just getting a little bit administratively heavy, and so we've lightened it up a little bit and just put some clear parameters on, and just decided to make it not quite so wishy-washy on what people were allowed to do and the types of devices they're allowed to get and who owned them and all of that. So it's pretty clear now that they are always going to be the property of the towns, that we manage them, and they just stay with the town when the time's done too. So happy to take any questions and ask Chris and Anthony to jump in, because we did all work on this collectively for the updates to the policies. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The recommendation is to approve. Do we approve or do we accept as information?
So the two HR ones need approval, whereas the
Okay.
administration of the cell phone policy just needs a accept as information.
Okay, so the first two do need official
Correct.
approval as a policy, so maybe we'll treat those two separate then. And then the cell phone one we can accept as information. So HR 22 and HR 12, do we want to treat those as two and one, or do we want to treat those separately? Anyone prepared to make a motion on those two, HR 12 and 22?
Motion to accept the new human resource policies 12 and 22 for the town of Fort Macleod.
Thank you.
Recognition and retirement, and the exempt employee work conditions policy.
Motions on the floor. Any discussion or further questions for administration? Councillor Monteith.
Interesting wording, exempt employee work conditions. I'm just wondering why we have to differentiate between those under collective bargaining and those not. Would we not provide a fair and consistent work environment for both? Why would we distinguish between the two?
Because out-of-scope employees are not represented by a collective. That's the exact reason why you would want to, is so that they know that they've got certain requirements and then also policies attached to them. So they don't have that guiding document like the collective agreement to refer to when there's certain things. They do have letters of employment and an employment agreement that outlines some of those, but this is more just to keep it straight across the board and just relevant to all out-of-scope employees. So this also includes our SCSS staff that aren't part of the collective agreement that are managed by a board. This includes the executive assistant who's not part of the collective agreement, as well as the directors. So that's kind of why there needs to be a guiding document that you would typically have, and things would be covered in the collective agreement that don't relate to all staff. And we don't want to be bargaining for the same things because we are different, and it would kind of be a conflict of interest for us to bargain for the same agreement that the union staff get.
So we ensure that whatever the collective bargaining unit gets in terms of conditions, whatever, is the same for the exempt?
Not necessarily, some are different, some are based on the management position. These are the ones that are typically those high-level entitlements that are done. There are some specific compensation, that type of thing, that are based on positions and not necessarily recognized.
So more, not less, is what you're saying.
Kind of, yeah.
Very good. Thank you. Any other questions, comments? Councillor Van Hagenbos?
Does this policy overrule contracts? Because it speaks to things that are mentioned in contracts, such as vacation and things like that.
We've aligned this pretty closely to existing contracts, and no, it would not, because the contracts were signed prior to. Anything that's in employment contracts right now would stay. It would be going forward. They would have to reach this policy.
Okay. But even if a contract were renewed, the contract is essentially the piece that governs first, correct?
Yes, but I don't know, honestly, most of our employees that are already on contracts, those are not annually renewed or anything like that. They're an existing employment agreement that continues as with their employment. It would be when they would, if they were to switch positions or anything like that and the contract was rewritten, that's when you could potentially see changes that would come, and they would have to move to follow this if they weren't already. And I can say most of ours are pretty close to bang on to what this policy represents.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Good questions. Any other comments, questions? We'll go Councillor Wolstenholme first and then back to you.
I was just curious, are councillors considered town employees?
I don't think they'd be classified as a town employee, an elected official paid by the town, but I don't know the official terminology of what that would be.
Do you want there to be a statement that says this excludes council? Well, I think it should. Because if that, yeah, I mean, that's easy enough to state. We do kind of talk specifically about the exempt, the full-time, the part-time. But if you'd like there to be a statement in here that this does not, council is, you're beholden to your own policy when it comes to payment and compensation or whatever. So, but we can easily add a line in here that says it does not apply to council.
You sure it's not the 6 weeks of paid holiday that you want?
Or the 1,800 hours? Councillor Henniger, did you have a question?
I was just going to speak to the fact that just from a unionized environment, to not have this defined and why it's so important, and Jim asked, if there is a situation that defaults where an employment standards group or another legislative body, they will say, well, what have you been doing? And if it could default in any setting to a union, they might then mimic it. So I do think it's really important that this is put in place. I personally don't think council needs to be in here, and I just whispered over to Mayor Fader is that we also had to sign our compensation and be aware of that. And I've made the mistake, and Jim's caught me where I've tried to say I was mayor hours. So I know you guys are watching, and I'm not too worried.
Okay. Yeah, Councillor Fox, go ahead.
Just one question for Lisa. So with Councillor Wolstenholme asking about council, because we're paid by the town, what about the fire department? Because they're paid staff members, basically. So how does that work?
Yeah, they have their own payroll policy and everything too. So they are not considered actual employees of the town, because they're actually considered a volunteer fire position, and then it's basically on call-outs that they have their own pay structure and everything. So they would not be considered exempt full-time employees, or any of the terminology that's listed here.
CEO Burdette.
Yeah, I think my comment from 5 minutes ago, it was just more along the lines of, actually in response to Marco's comment of this, working in tandem with the employment agreements and the employment contracts. Obviously, like it says, kind of vacation-wise, this is kind of the standard, but there will be instances where, CAO myself might recognize there's something else. For example, getting a new director of operations, they might be new to here, but they might have 20 years experience. We're most likely not going to start them with 3 weeks vacation, right? And so their employment contract's going to definitely be more specific to their specific role and responsibilities. Well, this is our guiding document to ensure that we are consistent. Yeah, but I think there's been some great questions and some good things to note when it comes to, okay, fire, council, so that we're clear, and so that when someone looks at this, and perhaps we can take a look and make sure that it's abundantly clear who this does apply to, so that when a firefighter gets a hold of this, like, oh, is this me, is this not me, and they have their own thing, or even council, right? Just and so maybe we'll take a look at kind of the opening line, like, who does this pertain to specifically, who does it not pertain to, so that it's abundantly clear.
Okay, very good. So motion is on the floor. If there is no further discussion, questions, or debates, we'll call it the question. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion is carried. Moving on then to accept as information the cell phone policy as amended. Anyone prepared to make that motion? Councillor Henniger makes that motion. Any questions for administration on that policy? Discussion, debate, seeing none, call the question. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion is carried. And that does conclude the public portion of our meeting. We'll call for a motion to go in camera for 2 items, intergovernmental relations and personnel. Councillor Van Haagvos makes that motion. Call the question. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion is carried.